A fleet of Boeing 727s cuts through Mexican airspace in the dead of night, each carrying 20 tons of pure Colombian cocaine. No border agents stop them, no military jets intercept them. The man who built this empire in the sky had corrupted everyone who mattered, and for a brief moment in the 1990s, he controlled more cocaine than any drug lord in history. But the higher he flew, the harder he would fall. This is the story of Amado Carrillo Fuentes, the man they called El Señor de los Cielos, the Lord of the Skies. Amado Carrillo Fuentes was born on December 17, 1956, in Guamuchilito, a tiny village outside Navolato in Sinaloa, Mexico. He entered the world as one of 12 children in a family where poverty was the only constant. His father, Walter Vicente Carrillo Vega, was a modest landowner, barely scraping by to feed his large family. The fields of Sinaloa were fertile, but opportunities were few and survival required more than hard work. In this environment, young Amado witnessed something that would shape his destiny. The region was steeped in drug cultivation, where marijuana and opium poppies grew alongside legitimate crops. The drug trade wasn't something foreign or distant, it was woven into the fabric of daily life. And Amado had a direct connection to this world through his uncle, Ernesto Fonseca Carrillo, known as Don Neto, a powerful leader in the Guadalajara Cartel. At the age of 12, Amado made a declaration that would define his life. He told his family he was leaving the village and would not return until he was rich. It was a bold promise from a child with only a 6th grade education, but Amado meant every word. He traveled to Chihuahua with nothing but ambition and the knowledge that his uncle could open doors that would otherwise remain locked. Under the tutelage of Don Neto, Amado Carrillo Fuentes began his education in drug trafficking. The Guadalajara Cartel, led by Miguel Ángel Félix Gallardo, alongside Don Neto and Rafael Caro Quintero, was the most powerful criminal organization in Mexico during the 1980s. They had pioneered the mass production of high-quality marijuana and established the first major connections with Colombian cocaine suppliers, including Pablo Escobar and the Medellin cartel. Amado started at the bottom, learning the mechanics of drug transportation and border operations. His uncle recognized the young man's intelligence and ruthlessness, qualities essential for survival in the cartel world. And when the Guadalajara cartel fractured following the 1985 murder of DEA agent Enrique Camarena and the subsequent arrests of its leaders, the Mexican drug trade splintered into regional plazas, territories controlled by different organizations. Don Neto promoted his nephew and sent him to Chihuahua to oversee cocaine shipments arriving from South America and manage their distribution among local plaza bosses. It was here, in the border cities of Ciudad Juárez and Ojinaga, that Amado would build his empire. He worked under Pablo Acosta Villarreal, known as El Zorro de Ojinaga, learning the intricacies of smuggling operations across the US-Mexico border. When Acosta was killed in 1987 during a raid by Mexican federal police, Rafael Aguilar Guajardo took sole control of what became known as the Juárez Cartel. Aguilar, and a former federal police commander with the Dirección Federal de Seguridad, had deep connections within the Mexican government. He made Amado his second-in-command, and together they expanded the cartel's operations. But Amado was learning more than logistics. He was watching how power worked, how loyalty shifted, and how the drug trade demanded constant adaptation. By 1993, the relationship between Rafael Aguilar Guajardo and Amado Carrillo Fuentes had become strained. Aguilar was under pressure from both Mexican and American authorities. A massive drug bust in Los Angeles in 1989 had changed the dynamics of the Juárez Cartel, and by 1991, Aguilar's partners were being arrested. When authorities issued a warrant for his arrest in 1993, Aguilar went on the run. On April 12, 1993, Rafael Aguilar Guajardo was on vacation in Cancun with more than a dozen members of his family. He believed he was safe in the tourist paradise, far from the border conflicts and cartel wars. He was wrong. Gunmen approached him and opened fire, killing him in front of his relatives. The shooters fled the scene but were later caught by police, and they admitted they had been hired to carry out the assassination. The contract had been placed by Amado Carrillo Fuentes. Just 2 days before his death, Aguilar had threatened to reveal his high-level Mexican government contacts. That threat sealed his fate. Amado could not allow his boss to expose the corruption network that kept the cartel operating. More importantly, he saw an opportunity to seize complete control of the Juárez Cartel. With Aguilar dead and his other partner, Eduardo Muñoz Talavera, arrested, Amado moved swiftly to consolidate power. The assassination set off Ciudad Juárez's worst bout of criminal violence up to that point, but when the dust settled, Amado Carrillo Fuentes stood alone at the top. He was now the boss, and he had a vision that would revolutionize drug trafficking. What made Amado Carrillo Fuentes different from every other drug lord was his innovation in transportation. While others used trucks, trains, and tunnels to move drugs across the border, Amado looked to the skies. He began acquiring a fleet of Boeing 727s and other large aircraft, creating his own private air force. These planes would fly from Colombia to landing strips in Mexico, each carrying between 10 and 20 tons of cocaine per trip. And the nickname El Señor de los Cielos, the Lord of the Skies, captured his dominance over this aerial smuggling network. He worked directly with the Cali cartel in Colombia, bypassing traditional middlemen and negotiating massive shipments. For each major operation, Amado would ship between $20 and $30 million to Colombia. The scale was unprecedented. The Juárez Cartel, under Amado's leadership, controlled key drug trafficking routes through Chihuahua, with bases in Ciudad Juárez, Guadalajara, Hermosillo, and Torreón, where drugs were stored before final shipment to the United States. His organization was responsible for cocaine, heroin, and marijuana trafficking, making it one of the most versatile and profitable criminal enterprises in history. At the height of his power, Amado Carrillo Fuentes was estimated to be worth $25 billion. This made him one of the wealthiest drug lords in history, second only to Pablo Escobar. The money flowed through elaborate money laundering operations via Colombia, allowing him to invest in legitimate businesses, real estate, and infrastructure. True to his childhood promise, Amado returned to his village a rich man. He built a large church and a larger-than-life statue of Jesus, along with a massive farmhouse for his family. He brought his brothers into the business, including Vicente Carrillo Fuentes, who would later take over the cartel. The boy who left Guamuchilito with nothing now controlled an empire. But Amado's success wasn't built on planes alone. It was built on corruption that reached the highest levels of the Mexican government. He systematically bribed officials to turn a blind eye to his activities and to actively eliminate his rivals. This created a perfect arrangement. Politicians could appear to be fighting the war on drugs by arresting members of rival cartels, while the Lord of the Skies continued operating without interference. The extent of his influence became clear in 1997 when it was revealed that General Jesus Gutierrez Rebollo, Mexico's top anti-drug official, and commissioner of the National Institute to Combat Drugs, was on Amado's payroll. The man charged with bringing down drug traffickers was actually protecting the biggest trafficker of them all. This revelation shocked both the Mexican and American governments and exposed the depth of cartel infiltration into Mexico's institutions. Amado paid millions of dollars to ensure that law enforcement looked the other way. He cultivated relationships with judges, police commanders, military officers, and politicians across multiple states. This network of corruption made him virtually untouchable, allowing his organization to move massive quantities of drugs without significant interference. The DEA's investigations later uncovered a web of connections linking Amado to corrupt officials and financial institutions throughout Mexico, but even the most sophisticated corruption network has limits. As Amado's operations grew larger, they attracted more attention from both Mexican authorities and the DEA. The sheer scale of his trafficking, moving tons of cocaine weekly, made him impossible to ignore forever. By early 1997, the walls were closing in. The United States had indicted Amado Carrillo Fuentes in multiple districts, including Florida and Texas, on heroin and cocaine charges. He was a fugitive with a massive bounty on his head. The DEA had launched sophisticated operations targeting US-based cells of his organization, resulting in the seizure of 11.5 metric tons of cocaine, over $18 million in US currency, almost 14,000 pounds of marijuana, and the arrest of 101 defendants. In March 1997, Amado's sister held her wedding celebration, and the drug lord attended. Mexican authorities raided the event, nearly capturing him, but he managed to escape. This close call shook him. He realized that his carefully constructed world was beginning to crumble. The pressure from law enforcement in both the United States and Mexico was intensifying, and even his vast corruption network couldn't guarantee his safety anymore. Amado began making efforts to disguise his appearance and relocate some of his operations to Chile, seeking refuge far from the Mexican border towns where he had built his empire. In Chile, he believed he could operate from a safe distance, managing his organization while avoiding the constant threat of arrest or assassination. But running was not enough. He needed a more permanent solution. Amado Carrillo Fuentes made the decision that would kill him. He would undergo extensive plastic surgery to change his appearance completely. If he could become unrecognizable, he could move freely, perhaps even disappear entirely from law enforcement's radar. It was a desperate gamble from a man who had spent his life calculating risks, but desperation makes men reckless. On July 4, 1997, Amado checked into Santa Monica Hospital in Mexico City under a false name. 3 surgeons, Dr. Jaime Godoy Singh, Dr. Ricardo Reyes Rincon, and Dr. Carlos Avila Melgem, prepared to perform the complex procedure. The surgery would involve extensive facial reconstruction and liposuction, a combination of procedures designed to make him completely unrecognizable. The operation lasted 8 hours. During the procedure and recovery, Amado was given anesthetics and dormicum, a powerful sleeping medication. According to Mariano Herrán Salvati, head of Mexico's anti-drug agency, the combination of these substances contradicted all medical science. Something went terribly wrong. The official cause of death was disputed. Some attributed it to heart failure caused by the medication, others to respiratory problems from residual anesthetic particles, and still others to complications from a malfunctioning respirator. What is certain is that Amado Carrillo Fuentes, the Lord of the Skies, never woke up. He died on the operating table, not from a rival's bullet or a government raid, but from a medical procedure meant to save him. The death of Amado Carrillo Fuentes was announced to the world, But not everyone believed it. Almost immediately, conspiracy theories emerged suggesting that he had faked his death to escape law enforcement and live in hiding. These theories were fueled by several suspicious circumstances surrounding his demise. 5 months after Amado's death, 2 of the 3 surgeons who operated on him were found dead. Their mutilated bodies were discovered in sealed drums along a roadside in Guerrero State. Forensic doctors identified them as Dr. Godoy and Dr. Reyes. The 3rd surgeon disappeared. The prosecutors, who charged the doctors with murder, concluded they had intentionally administered the fatal combination of drugs, but the murder of 2 of them suggested someone wanted to ensure they never testified. Adding to the mystery, Mexican authorities were reluctant to release complete autopsy results and DNA evidence. When the political magazine Animal requested pathological studies performed on the alleged corpse's organs and the results of DNA identification, authorities provided limited information. This fueled speculation that the body in the morgue was not actually Amado Carrillo Fuentes, but the evidence of his death was strong enough to convince the DEA and Mexican authorities. More importantly, that with the power vacuum his death created was real and immediate. If Amado had merely faked his death, he would have continued controlling his organization from the shadows, but that's not what happened. The death of Amado Carrillo Fuentes triggered a violent power struggle within the Juárez Cartel. His younger brother, Vicente Carrillo Fuentes, known as El Viceroy, emerged as the new leader, but he faced insurmountable challenges. Rival cartels, particularly the Sinaloa Cartel, led by Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, saw an opportunity to seize Juárez's valuable trafficking routes. What followed was one of the bloodiest cartel wars in Mexican history. The battle for Ciudad Juárez between the Sinaloa Cartel and the Juárez Cartel resulted in the deaths of between 5,000 and 12,000 people. The violence transformed the once thriving border city into one of the most dangerous places on earth. Businesses closed, families fled, and the streets ran red with blood. Vicente Carrillo Fuentes, despite his brother's wealth and connections, could not hold the empire together. He was eventually indicted in the Northern District of Texas for cocaine violations in 1993, and a warrant was issued for his arrest. Years later, he would be captured and sentenced to 28 years in prison for organized crime, money laundering, and weapons possession. The Juárez Cartel, once the most powerful drug trafficking organization in Mexico, splintered and weakened. The territory that Amado had controlled through strategic vision and massive corruption became a battlefield where multiple factions fought for scraps of what he had built. When the organization never recovered its former dominance, Amado Carrillo Fuentes revolutionized the drug trade, but his legacy is written in blood and broken lives. His fleet of planes moved countless tons of cocaine into the United States, fueling addiction, violence, and destroyed families across both nations. The corruption he spread weakened Mexico's institutions and public trust in government. His organization's violence claimed hundreds of lives, from rivals to innocent bystanders caught in the crossfire. The $25 billion he amassed came at an immeasurable human cost. The communities along the trafficking routes he controlled were corrupted and traumatized by his presence. Ciudad Juárez, the heart of his empire, descended into years of violence after his death that it still hasn't fully recovered from. The war for control of his territories killed thousands and displaced many more. His innovation, using commercial aircraft to transport drugs, raised the stakes of trafficking to industrial levels. What had once been a trade measured in pounds and kilograms now moved in tons. This escalation forced other cartels to become more violent, more sophisticated, and more ruthless to compete. Amado didn't just build an empire, he transformed the entire Mexican drug trade into something more deadly and destructive. Even his family paid the price. His brothers who joined the business faced constant danger, imprisonment, and violent deaths. His children inherited not wealth and security, but targets on their backs and the constant attention of law enforcement. His son, Vicente José Carrillo Leyva, would later face his own legal troubles, trapped in the legacy of his father's choices. The story of Amado Carrillo Fuentes reveals fundamental truths about the drug trade and the illusion of power it creates. He was intelligent, calculating, and innovative, qualities that in another life might have made him a successful, legitimate businessman. Instead, he chose crime, and that choice led inevitably to his downfall. No amount of money could buy true security. Despite his $25 billion, Amado died alone on an operating table, desperate and afraid, trying to change his face because he could no longer show it in public. The wealth that should have brought freedom instead became a prison, forcing him into hiding and ultimately into a surgery that killed him. No corruption network is complete enough to ensure lasting protection. Even with Mexico's top anti-drug official on his payroll, Amado could not escape the combined pressure of Mexican and American law enforcement. The bigger his organization grew, the more impossible it became to hide. Success in the drug trade contains the seeds of its own destruction. The violence that builds an empire eventually destroys it. Amado assassinated his boss and friend to take power, but that act of betrayal set the pattern for what would follow. When he died, his own organization turned on itself, and rivals attacked with the same ruthlessness he had once used. The empire built on murder and intimidation collapsed into chaos the moment its leader was gone. Amado Carrillo Fuentes was 42 years old when he died. He had spent less than 5 years as the head of the Juárez Cartel, yet in that brief time, he became one of the most powerful criminals in history. His fleet of planes, his vast wealth, and his network of corruption made him seem invincible. But invincibility is always an illusion in the narco world. The boy from Guamuchilito, who promised to return rich, kept that promise. He built churches and statues, provided for his family, and became a legend in Sinaloa. But the cost of that promise was his life, his freedom, and ultimately his legacy. He is remembered not as a hero or a success, but as a cautionary tale about the temporary nature of criminal power. His death on July 4, 1997, marked the end of an era. The Lord of the Skies fell from the heights he had conquered, brought down not by enemies or law enforcement, but by his own desperation. The man who controlled the skies died trying to hide from the consequences of his choices. The Mexican drug trade continued after his death, becoming even more violent and fragmented. New cartels rose to fight over the territory he once controlled. More lives were lost, more communities were destroyed. The cycle he helped perpetuate continues to this day, a reminder that the drug trade creates only suffering, regardless of who sits at the top. Amado Carrillo Fuentes built an empire in the sky, but empires built on crime are houses of cards waiting for the wind to blow. His story is not one of triumph, but of waste, wasted potential, wasted lives, and wasted opportunity. The Lord of the Skies learned too late that no one escapes gravity forever. What goes up must eventually come down, and the fall is always fatal.